The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old graveyard, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decayed leaves. Moonlight spilled like silver water across the cracked headstones, illuminating names that had been forgotten by time. Somewhere in the distance, an owl's cry echoed, sharp and lonely. Amid the tombstones, a small figure moved with silent purpose, a girl no older than 10. With tangled dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her young face, she crouched near a toppled gravestone. Brushing away the moss that covered the carved letters, her fingers trembled slightly, though not from cold. She had grown used to the chill of night, but from a strange sense of connection. She whispered softly, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." The words were meant for the spirits she believed lingered. Yet the graveyard was her only home, and the graves were her family. The girl had no name, or at least none that anyone living cared to remember. She survived on scraps scavenged from abandoned houses, leftover bread found near the market walls, and water from a half-frozen fountain at the center of the graveyard. She learned to move quietly, to hide when the living came near. Because humans had always been unpredictable, capable of cruelty that scared her more than the darkness itself. But the dead were different. They were still, patient, and silent. They listened when she spoke. Sometimes she thought she felt their answers in the whisper of the wind or the faint touch of cool air against her skin. And when loneliness pressed too heavily against her small shoulders, she would sit among the stones and let the moonlight wrap around her like a blanket. That night, the moon hung high and full, bathing the graveyard in an almost magical glow. The girl wandered deeper than she usually dared, toward a section where the stones were older, worn almost to nothing. Legends told that a shadow moved their presence that no living soul had faced and returned to tell. Most children would have fled in terror, but she had grown bold in her solitude. There was a strange comfort in facing things that others feared. She paused beside a broken obelisk, examining the cracks with curiosity. A sound behind her made her freeze a soft, deliberate footstep on the dry leaves. She spun around, heart hammering in her chest, but saw no one. The air grew colder, sharper, as if warning her. Then she saw him. He emerged from the shadows like a whisper of night given shape. Tall, impossibly pale, with eyes that glimmered red under the moonlight, he moved with the ease of someone who belonged to the darkness itself. His black cloak swept the ground silently, and his presence seemed to bend the very light around him. The girl's breath caught. She had heard stories, whispers of a vampire who lived in the castle beyond the hills, a count whose heart was said to be older than kingdoms, whose eyes held centuries of hunger and secrets. But she did not tremble. Perhaps it was the many nights alone among the dead, or perhaps it was the strange courage that loneliness had carved into her heart. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small but steady. The figure paused, studying her with an intensity that made the air hum. "A visitor," he said finally, his voice smooth and cold, yet carrying an odd note of curiosity. "And you are not afraid?" "I have no one to be afraid for," she said simply, shrugging as though the weight of the world rested on her shoulders every day. He stepped closer, and she did not move back. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, the girl felt something she could not name, a twinge of fascination, of danger mixed with curiosity. Most humans ran at the mere hint of him. Yet here she was, small and unprotected, and yet unafraid. "Strange," he murmured, almost to himself. A child with the courage of someone older than the stones themselves. He circled her slowly, as though studying her from every angle. "Do you know where you are?" "I live here," she replied without hesitation. "This is my home." He tilted his head, regarding her with a sharp, almost predatory gaze. "This graveyard. You call it home?" She nodded. "The living hurt people. The dead, they just watch. They listen." She traced her fingers over the cold stone at her side. "They're quiet." For a moment, he said nothing, his presence towering over her small frame. Then, as if amused, he let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh-a-sound that made the wind seem too still around them. "You speak to the dead as though they were friends," he said, his eyes glinting. "And yet, you survive." "I have to," she said softly. "There's no one else." The vampire count studied her in silence. There was something remarkable about her, not just her fearlessness, but the strange resilience in her eyes. He had walked through centuries of loneliness, seen empires rise and fall, hearts betray, and yet here was this small creature, untouched by fear, untouched by despair, or so it seemed. A sudden sound, leaves rustling near the edge of the graveyard, made her flinch. The Count's hand shot out, as swift as shadow, and a dark mist seemed to curl around his fingers, brushing the intruder away. The girl's eyes widened in astonishment, and for the first time, she saw not just the danger in him, but a promise of power, of protection. "Do you always wander alone?" he asked, his tone softer now. "Yes," she said simply. "It is easier that way." He considered her answer, and for reasons he did not fully understand. He felt a strange pull of curiosity that had not stirred in him for centuries. "Very well," he said finally. "Come with me. There is a place you might find. Safer than this graveyard." The girl hesitated, her instincts warning her to run, to hide. Yet something in the warmth behind his cold eyes told her that this was different. Something in the way he watched over her, not with hunger, but with interest, made her heart hesitate. "Why would I go with you?" she asked, suspicion in her voice. "Because," he said, his voice low and melodic, "the night has chosen you, and I have chosen to protect it." Her green eyes narrowed, the words settling like stones in her mind. "Protect it, or control it?" she asked quietly. He only smiled faintly, a shadow of centuries pressing into the curve of his lips. "Both, perhaps. Time will tell." She studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. She did not fully understand why she trusted him, why the strange calm in his presence seemed to outweigh every instinct screaming at her to flee. But the world had been cruel, and maybe the Count could be different. The vampire extended his hand, and after a heartbeat, the girl took it. The moment their fingers touched, the cold of the night seemed to fade, replaced by a strange warmth that felt almost alive as he lifted her into the air, shadows stretching and twisting beneath them. The wind carried a whisper through the ancient gravestones, a warning, or perhaps a promise. She will not remain a child of the grave forever. The night is hers now, and his. Below, the graveyard remained silent, save for the soft stirring of leaves. A pair of eyes, hidden in the dark, watched as the girl disappeared into the unknown, leaving behind only faint footprints in the soil. The spirits seemed to sigh, as though aware that a story far greater than any they had ever witnessed was beginning tonight. The castle's silhouette rose against the moon, dark towers reaching like fingers into the night. The girl's heart pounded with a mix of fear and curiosity as she glanced at her companion. He did not speak, but his presence alone was enough to command both respect and unease. And in that silent ride through the mist, something shifted, not just in the Count, whose long-buried fascination had awakened, but in the girl, who had never known the touch of true attention, the weight of protection, or the thrill of being chosen. The night deepened, and the castle doors opened before them, welcoming a child of the graveyard into a world she had never imagined. But outside, beyond the walls of both graveyard and castle, shadows stirred, and the whisper of a warning rode on the wind. All who enter this palace of shadows may never leave the same. The castle loomed above the dark forest like a sentinel of the night. Its spires pierced the sky, and its black stone walls seemed to drink in the moonlight. The girl clung to the Count's hand as they crossed the drawbridge, her small feet echoing on the worn wood. The air smelled of ancient stone and candle wax, mixed with the faint, metallic temps of something old and powerful. She had never seen a place so large, so alive with secrets. Inside, the castle was even more imposing. Long corridors stretched into shadow, lined with tapestries depicting battles and kings long forgotten. Candles flickered in sconces, casting dancing light across the marble floors. Her eyes were wide, drinking in the beauty and the strangeness, but she did not speak. Words felt unnecessary here. The castle seemed to understand her without them. The Count guided her through the halls, his voice low and calm. "This is your new home," he said. "Here, You will be safe from the dangers that wait outside these walls. But you must also learn the ways of this place. It is not a home for the timid." She nodded slowly, still absorbing the vastness around her. Though her heart beat with a mix of excitement and fear, she did not feel the cold dread that had haunted her in the graveyard. There was something about the Count, something in the curve of his eyes, the patience in his stride that made the castle feel less frightening. "Safe. And yet strange," she murmured. "It does not feel like a home." He glanced at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "A home is what you make of it, but it will take time for you to see the heart of this place." The girl's curiosity began to outweigh her fear. She wandered down one corridor while the Count spoke to someone unseen, her fingers trailing along the stone walls. Each door she passed seemed to hum softly as if alive. Some led to libraries filled with dusty tomes, others to chambers that glittered with strange crystals that glowed faintly in the darkness. Shadows danced around her, yet they felt less threatening than they should have. It was as if the castle recognized her, allowed her passage where others would have faltered. Eventually, the Count led her to a chamber unlike any other. Tall windows framed a view of the forest below, and the floor was covered with rich rugs that muffled every sound. A hearth crackled in the corner, casting a warm light across the room. The girl sank to the floor, exhausted, and watched the flames flicker. "You may rest here," the Count said softly. "But there is something you must know. This castle, it is not only walls and stone, it has its own spirit. It will test you. It will challenge you. And it will reveal truths you may not wish to see." Looked up at him, her green eyes bright with determination. "I am not afraid," she said. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Courage will serve you well here." Days passed in a blur of learning and exploration. The girl began to understand the rhythms of the castle, the way doors creaked when spirits moved behind them, the faint whispers that drifted through the corridors at night, the way the shadows seemed to shift when no one was looking. She discovered rooms filled with ancient artifacts, glowing crystals that pulsed with light, and mirrors that reflected not only her image, but glimpses of the past. The Count watched her closely, teaching her without overt instruction. He showed her how to move quietly, how to sense the subtle changes in the air, how to recognize the spirits that lingered within the walls. The girl was quick to learn, her mind sharp and her heart brave. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension between them, a silent struggle of power and will. The Count was patient but commanding. The girl was obedient but unbroken. She would question him, challenge him, and sometimes defy him outright. Each time, he did not punish her, but the weight of his gaze reminded her of his power, of the centuries he had lived, and the darkness that surrounded him. One evening, as a storm raged outside, lightning illuminating the castle towers, the girl wandered into a room she had never seen. It was a gallery filled with portraits of people she did not recognize, men and women dressed in clothes of a time long past. But as she walked closer, one portrait stopped her heart. It was a woman who looked almost exactly like her, with the same dark hair, the same piercing green eyes. The girl reached out, trembling. Who is this?" she whispered. The Count appeared in the doorway silently, his cloak brushing the floor. "She was someone I lost long ago," he said quietly, his voice tinged with something the girl had never heard from him before.
"Pain.
A part of my past that can never return." The girl turned to him, eyes wide. She looks like me." He did not answer at once. Instead, he studied her, his gaze deep and searching. "Perhaps," he said finally, "there are connections that time cannot erase. You may be more important than you realize." That night, the girl could not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain fall across the castle grounds. The storm made the trees bow and shiver, and the wind howled like a living thing. She thought of the graveyard, of the quiet graves, of the world she had left behind. And she thought of the Count, of his strange power and the weight of centuries in his eyes. There was something in him that called to her, not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that intrigued her, pulled her closer, even as it warned her to stay away. She had never known such a presence before. He was like the night itself, beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The following days brought more lessons. The Count showed her the hidden chambers of the castle, libraries filled with forbidden knowledge, the artifacts that held ancient power. He taught her to recognize the spirits that lingered in the halls, to listen to the whispers of the walls, to sense the subtle changes in the air that marked danger or opportunity. Yet the girl also discovered the darker side of the castle. A servant was injured by one of the restless spirits, and she realized that even in this grand, magnificent place, danger lurked in every shadow. The Count's power was great, but it was not absolute. There were forces in the world and the shadows that even he could not always control. Despite this, their bond grew. She challenged him, questioned him, forced him to see the world through her eyes that had known only loneliness, fear, and the quiet wisdom of survival. And he, in turn, revealed fragments of himself, moments of vulnerability, flashes of memory, and the burden of centuries spent in darkness. One evening, the girl ventured into a forbidden corridor. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old stone. Candles flickered along the walls, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the end of the corridor, she found a door she had never noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light spilled out from within. Curiosity overcame caution. She pushed the door open. Inside was a small chamber, empty except for a single mirror that stood against the far wall. She approached it and saw her reflection, but something was different. Behind her in the glass, a shadow moved. A whisper brushed against her ear, cold and soft. "Who are you?" The girl spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror reflected only herself. Her heart raced, and for the first time in the castle, she felt true fear. Then, a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "You should not be here," the Count said, his eyes dark, unreadable. "This place is not meant for the unprepared. I was curious," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I wanted to see everything." He studied her silently, and the shadows seemed to bend around him. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he said at last. "Yet perhaps it is also necessary. You are unlike any child I have known, and perhaps unlike any being I have encountered in centuries." The girl swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. "Will I ever understand this place?" she asked softly. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "You will," he said, "but understanding comes with risk. And with choice? Tonight you have chosen curiosity over caution. The question is, what will you choose next?" Lightning flashed, illuminating the chamber in stark white light. In that moment, the girl felt the weight of the castle, of the Count, of her own small but stubborn heart. And she realized that she had stepped into a world that was no longer just a home, it was a test, a challenge, and perhaps a destiny, as the storm raged outside. The Count and the girl stood in the chamber, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. The castle seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something significant had begun, a story of shadows, of power, of a bond that would defy both time and fear, and far beyond the walls of the castle, a new presence stirred. Something ancient, something jealous, something waiting for a moment of weakness. The whisper of a threat drifted on the wind. The Palace of Shadows has a new heart, and it will be tested soon. The night air was thick with mist as the girl wandered along the castle's outer terraces. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and whispering secrets of its own. The storm from the previous days had passed, leaving behind a sky dotted with stars, cold and brilliant. She leaned against the stone railing, her mind restless with questions about the Count, the castle, and the strange connection she felt to both. The Count appeared beside her silently, as if he had stepped from the shadows themselves. His cloak brushed the stone, and the moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face. She turned to him, noticing for the first time a trace of fatigue in his eyes, a hint of a sorrow he had long hidden behind centuries of power. "You think too deeply," he said softly, though not as a reprimand. "Your mind races faster than your years should allow." I cannot stop thinking," she admitted. "About this place, about you, about everything. I feel like there is so much I do not understand." He studied her in silence. "We were beginning to sense the truth," he said finally. "The castle, the forest, even I. None of this exists without a price, and sometimes the price is heavier than the heart can bear." The girl looked at him, her curiosity stronger than her fear. "What price?" she asked. He took a step closer, the wind catching the edges of his cloak. "There is a curse," he said, his voice low. "Long ago, love betrayed me. I was bound to darkness as punishment. I have walked centuries without the chance to love freely, to feel truly, without consequence. And now you have come." She shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of his words. "Does that mean, if I care for you, something bad could happen?" "Perhaps," he replied. "Perhaps you will awaken something long buried, something even I have forgotten how to feel. The choice is yours, whether to step closer or to remain in safety." For a moment, the girl felt the gravity of her own heartbeat, of the strange pull that bound her to him. She had lived in fear and solitude for so long that the idea of connection, of trust, seemed both frightening and irresistible. Always been strong in her survival, but now, strength took on a new meaning, the courage to face the unknown, to face a heart that carried centuries of darkness. Days passed, and with them came lessons and tests. The Count guided her into the forest that stretched beyond the castle, teaching her the ways of shadows and spirits. She learned to listen to the wind, to recognize the rustle of creatures invisible. Too ordinary eyes, to feel the subtle shifts in energy that marked danger. She also learned about herself, about her courage, her empathy, and the fierce determination that had carried her. Through years of loneliness, the girl's presence stirred. Something in the Count, he found himself watching her when he thought. She was unaware, noting the way her hair caught the sunlight. The quickness of her mind, the courage in her small but unbroken body. He had walked through centuries of betrayal and darkness, yet her presence made his chest ache in ways he had not felt in lifetimes. One evening, as twilight settled across the castle, a disturbance arrived from the forest. A rival Bian. Ancient spirit bound to the dark woods had sensed the girl's presence and her unique connection to the Count. The spirit moved with purpose, a jealous shadow that sought to claim or destroy. What had been awakened? The girl was exploring the castle's outer gardens when she sensed it first, chill in the air, sudden stillness among the trees, and the whisper of voices that were not her own. She paused, instinctively scanning the surroundings. The Count appeared behind her, his eyes narrowing. "You feel it too?" he said. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "Something is coming, something dangerous." "Good," he murmured. "Then you are beginning to see the truth. Danger is always near those who touch the darkness, and those who awaken what has been hidden for centuries." Together, they moved through the gardens, the girl noticing the subtle ways he shielded her from the unseen presence. The Count's power flared in small bursts, shadows bending, lights flickering, the air itself seeming to respond to his will. And yet, even with his strength, the threat was palpable. The rival spirit appeared suddenly, emerging from the darkness of the trees. Its form was fluid, ever-shifting, beautiful yet terrible. And its eyes glowed with a hunger that sent shivers through the girl's spine. The Count stepped between her and the spirit, his presence a living barrier. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly. I want to help," the girl said, stepping forward despite his warning. The Count's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "You cannot understand what is at stake," he said. "This is not a game, one wrong step." "I can learn," she said firmly. "Let me try." Reluctantly, he allowed her to move forward. She focused, recalling the lessons he had taught her about energy, shadows, and the spirits that lingered in the castle. She reached out, feeling the currents of the air, the subtle pulses of life and death intertwined, and spoke softly. The spirit hesitated, drawn to her courage and determination, as if sensing that she was unlike the others who had come before. The Count watched, his chest tight with a strange mixture of pride and fear. She was daring, brave, and alive in a way that even he could not fully control. Yet the risk was immense, and one mistake could cost them both dearly. The confrontation lasted only moments, though it felt like hours. Finally, the spirit recoiled, hissing, and vanished into the forest, leaving only the lingering echo of its presence. The girl's hand shook, and she turned to face the Count, expecting rebuke or relief. Instead, he looked at her with a strange intensity, a mixture of awe and something darker. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "But strength alone is not enough. The heart must also be ready." The girl's eyes met his, and for the first time she saw the depth of his longing, the loneliness, the sorrow, the centuries of waiting for something, or someone, to awaken him from the darkness. That night she could not sleep. She wandered the corridors of the castle, her thoughts restless. She thought of the graveyard, of the Count, of the spirit that had come so close. And she realized something she had not allowed herself to feel before. She cared. It's not in the quiet way one cares for survival, but in a deep, strange way that made her pulse quicken and her chest ache. The Count found her on the terrace, staring at the stars. He did not speak immediately, letting her silence stretch between them. Finally, he said, "You feel it too, don't you?" I think so," she admitted. "I feel something I cannot explain." He nodded slowly, the shadows around him deepening. "Ash, it is not to be feared," he said. "It is the stirring of what has been buried too long. And yet, there is danger in feeling, danger in longing, danger in connection." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Then why? Why do I not turn away?" "Because even in darkness," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "there is something worth holding on to. Even in centuries of sorrow, there is the chance of light, and perhaps you are that light." Before she could respond, a new sound reached their ears, a scream carried on the wind, distant but unmistakable. The Count's eyes narrowed, and he moved with impossible speed toward the source, the girl following as best she could. They arrived at the edge of the forest, and the girl saw it. The rival spirit, stronger now, had captured something or someone important. Its form twisted in the moonlight, and the air shimmered with dark energy. As the Count's hand shot out, summoning shadows that coiled and struck at the intruder, yet even his power was met with resistance. The girl's heart pounded. She knew the moment was critical. She could either run and hide, as she had done all her life, or step forward, joining the battle that was both terrifying and necessary. Her instincts, honed through years of survival, told her what to do. She reached into the depths of her courage, the lessons the Count had taught her, guiding her every move. And as she stepped closer, ready to face the unknown, she felt the pull of destiny, the invisible thread that bound her to the Count, to the castle, and to the darkness that surrounded them. And then, in a heartbeat, the spirit vanished, taking with it the girl's first real glimpse of danger beyond her graveyard. The Count's hand clenched at his side, his eyes scanning the forest for any sign of it. "You are not safe," he said quietly, his voice heavy with warning and something else. Something unspoken, something that weighed on both of them. "And yet, neither am I." The girl swallowed hard, her pulse racing. For the first time, she understood the truth of the Count's words, the depth of the risk, and the strange, powerful bond forming between them. The night stretched on, full of whispers and shadows, and the girl knew, deep in her heart, that nothing would ever be the same. The castle, the Count, the darkness. All of it was alive, and all of it was waiting for the choices she would make next. The castle stood silent under the first light of dawn, its towers piercing the pale sky like blackened fingers reaching toward the heavens. The forest below stretched endlessly, dark and mysterious, hiding secrets in every shadow. The girl stood at the highest terrace, her hair whipping in the cold morning wind. Her eyes, once full of fear and hesitation, now held a strength that had been forged through months of solitude, danger, and discovery. The Count appeared beside her, moving silently as always. The storm from the previous night had left the air crisp and sharp. For the first time, he looked at her not as a fragile child, but as a companion, someone who had faced the darkness alongside him and emerged changed. "You are ready," he said quietly. The girl turned to him, unsure. "Ready for what?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the forest, where shadows lingered unnaturally, coiling like living tendrils. "The spirit has returned," he said, "stronger than before. It knows you exist, and it will not stop until it takes what it believes belongs to it. We must face it together." Her heart thumped with a mix of fear and determination. She had faced shadows before, but never like this, never against something so powerful and ancient. Yet she felt no hesitation. She had learned courage, resilience, and the value of trust. And she had learned that standing beside someone you care for could be more powerful than standing alone. They descended into the forest, the Count moving with silent grace, shadows bending to his will. The girl followed closely, drawing on the lessons he had taught, heard the subtle movements, the way to sense the currents of energy, the way to confront fear without letting it dominate. Every step seemed heavier than the last, yet she did not falter. The spirit emerged suddenly, its form more terrifying than she had imagined. It shimmered like smoke, ever-shifting, with eyes that burned like embers. Its presence warped the air, bending reality, making the trees twist unnaturally. The Count stepped in front of her, a living barrier of power and authority. But the girl did not step back. "This is our fight," she said softly, more to herself than to him. The Count studied her, a rare vulnerability flickering across his face. "And ours?" he agreed. The battle began with sudden intensity. Shadows clashed, winds howled, and the air was filled with the hum of ancient energy. The spirit lashed at them, twisting the forest with invisible hands, yet they moved as one. The Count's power was immense, but the girl's courage and insight added an unexpected strength. She reached into the currents of the forest, feeling the subtle pull of life and death, and whispered words that made the spirit hesitate, if only for a heartbeat. "Now," the Count said, his voice deep and commanding, "strike together." The girl focused her mind, her heart steady despite the fear. She extended her hands, drawing on the energy she had learned to sense. Shadows responded, coiling around the spirit, holding it in place. The Count followed, his own power weaving with hers, creating a bond neither had fully understood before. The spirit shrieked, its form twisting violently, yet it could not break the combined strength of the Count and the girl. With a final resonant command, the Count's voice echoing like thunder, the spirit was forced back into the forest, retreating with a hiss that promised it would not return for a long time. Silence fell once more. The girl dropped to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. The Count knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair back gently. "You have done well," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard, "stronger than I imagined, braver than I dared hope." She looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. "We did it. Together." He nodded, the shadows around him softening. For the first time. The darkness in his eyes seemed tempered by something warmer, something he had thought lost to him centuries ago. "Yes, together." They returned to the castle, the forest now quiet, almost reverent. The girl's steps were lighter than before, her confidence growing with each moment. She felt no fear of the shadows now, only respect for them, and for the strength that came from facing them side by side with the Count. In the great hall, the Count paused, studying the portraits of his ancestors. For centuries, he had been haunted by loss, betrayal, and the weight of his curse. But now, seeing the girl standing tall, brave, and unafraid, he felt something shift, a loosening of the chains that had bound his heart for so long. "You changed me," he said quietly, almost to himself, not through fear, not through obedience, but through life, through life. The girl's eyes widened. I was only trying to survive." "Survival," he said, "has its own kind of bravery. And sometimes it leads to something greater, something beyond the night." Days passed, and the castle settled into a new rhythm. The girl continued to explore, learning the history of the Count's family, the secrets of the castle, and the ways of the shadows. But she was no longer the frightened child who had wandered the graveyard alone. She had become a part of the castle, a part of the Count's life, and a part of something much larger than either had anticipated. The Count watched her with a mixture of pride and something else, a longing he had thought buried. He began to trust her with more than lessons and guidance. He shared stories of centuries past, of love and loss, of moments that had defined him and moments he had hoped to forget. She listened, not with fear, but with empathy, her presence a balm to his centuries-old wounds. One evening, they stood on the highest terrace again, the moon rising full and bright over the forest. The girl looked at him, her eyes reflecting both the silver light and her own newfound strength. "I never thought I would find anything like this," she said softly. "Not a home, not a friend, not this." The Count looked at her, his gaze intense but gentle. "Nor did I," he admitted. "I thought the night was all I would ever know. Darkness was my only companion." "Odd. You have changed that. You have shown me that even in shadows, light can exist. Even in centuries of sorrow, hope can awaken." A breeze swept past them, carrying the scent of the forest and the faint whispers of the castle's spirits. The girl reached for his hand, hesitating only a moment before intertwining her fingers with his. It was a gesture of trust, of connection, and of the bond that had grown between them through fear, courage, and shared challenges. The Count held her hand, feeling the warmth that had been absent from his life for centuries. "The night is ours," he said softly, "but so is the day, and I will not let it go to waste." For the first time, he allowed himself to feel fully, to hope fully. The curse that had weighed on him for centuries had not vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by her presence, her courage, and her heart. Together, they had faced darkness, faced fear, and faced the truths that had long haunted them both. The girl smiled, a mix of relief and wonder in her expression. "I am ready," she said, "ready for whatever comes next." The Count's gaze softened, shadows receding around him. "And so am I," he said. "For the first time in centuries, I am not alone. Perhaps for the first time, I can believe in a future, one that is brighter than the night." The castle seemed to respond to their bond, the walls no longer cold and imposing but alive and welcoming. The shadows that had once felt threatening now moved with a gentle rhythm, almost protective. The spirits of the castle whispered softly, as though acknowledging the union of courage and power, trust and love. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, peaceful and watchful. The rival spirit had vanished, at least for now, unable to challenge the strength of their bond. The night had been tested, the darkness confronted, and the heart had emerged victorious. The Count and the girl stood together on the terrace, watching the first light of dawn break over the horizon. The wind carried the scent of new beginnings, of choices made, of paths forged through courage and connection. The girl, once a lonely child wandering among graves, now stood at the heart of a palace of shadows, no longer afraid, no longer alone. And the Count, once bound by centuries of sorrow and darkness, now felt the stirrings of redemption, hope, and a bond that would endure beyond time itself. As the sun rose, casting gold over the towers in the forest, the Count knelt beside the girl, not as a master, but as a partner, an equal. A companion who had shared the journey through darkness and emerged into light. "The night was ours," he whispered, his voice both tender and strong. "And now, so is the day." The girl smiled, her hand resting in his. "Then let us face it, together." And together, they stepped into the new day, the castle behind them no longer a prison of shadows, but a home of strength, courage, enduring connection. A testament to the power of bravery, trust, and love that could survive even the deepest darkness.